Picture this. It's October 3rd, 1849. The rain-soaked cobblestone streets of Baltimore are absolute chaos, teeming with ruthless political gangs and the deafening roar of election day crowds. And right there, amidst the mud and the madness, outside a bustling polling tavern, a man is found lying in the gutter. He's completely delirious. He's wearing cheap, soiled, ill-fitting clothes that definitely aren't his, and he is entirely unable to explain what on earth has happened to him over the last week. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're plunging into a dark, gritty investigation. Because this wasn't just any man in the gutter. This was Edgar Allan Poe, and he was about to become the center of a gothic mystery way darker than anything he ever actually wrote. Our very first clue in this century-and-a-half-old cold case is this frantic note. It was scribbled down by a guy named Joseph W. Walker, who worked for the Baltimore Sun, right after he discovered our victims semi-conscious outside a polling place called Gunners Hall. Walker was so freaked out by the man's ragged state that he immediately fired off this message to an acquaintance that the victims somehow managed to name. Section 1. The ultimate true crime irony. The creator of the detective story becomes the victim. Okay, we really have to start by appreciating the chilling irony here. The delirious man outside Gunners Hall was the brilliant mind who literally invented the modern detective story. Just think about that for a second. The very guy who gave us the whole template for the genius investigator solving impossible crimes was now staring down an impossible, unsolved crime of his own. He'd spent his life crafting this image of himself as an analytical mastermind who loved puzzles. Yet his own death? It remains one of literature's greatest unsolved mysteries. Section 2. Missing days and bizarre evidence, tracing the vanished week. Like any good detective, we have to map out the timeline. Methodically tracking his whereabouts reveals a terrifying 6-day blackout. He leaves Richmond on September 27th, heading to Philadelphia to edit some poetry before going back to New York. He arrives in Baltimore the next day and then, poof, nothing. He literally vanishes into thin air. For nearly a whole week, nobody knows where he is, until he turns up at the polls on October 3rd, hovering near death. So what exactly happened in those dark Baltimore alleys during those missing days? The physical evidence makes things even more confusing. Poe was famous for wearing neat, tailored suits of black wool. But the guy found in the gutter? He was wearing a thin, sleazy black alpaca sack coat ripped at the seams, terrible-fitting steel-mixed pants, a totally tattered palm leaf hat, and coarse, unblackened boots. No vest, no neckcloth. It's like he was completely stripped of his identity and put into a stranger's costume. And here is where it gets incredibly weird. Despite the cheap clothes and the fact that he looked like he'd been robbed blind, he mysteriously still had a valuable hidden sword cane on him. He had actually accidentally swapped canes with a Dr. Carter at a restaurant just before leaving Richmond. So if street ruffians mugged him for his nice clothes, why did they leave him grasping a concealed weapon? It just doesn't fit the profile of a standard robbery, does it? Section 3. The political couping conspiracy. Kidnapped for a vote. To make sense of those missing days, we have to look into a terrifying 19th century political practice called couping. Back then, Baltimore elections were notoriously violent and corrupt. Political gangs would literally snatch innocent people off the street, throw them into a holding cell, a coop, ply them with heavy liquor or drugs, and drag them from pole to pole. They'd swap out the victims' clothes so they could vote multiple times under fake identities without the poll workers noticing. Now, apply that to our victim. Poe was missing for days. He was found highly intoxicated or drugged. He was dressed in someone else's shabby clothes. And where was he found? Right outside Gunners Hall, a Fourth Ward polling place, completely notorious for couping gangs. It's a terrifying yet highly plausible scenario. The master of horror was essentially kidnapped and worked to death by a political street gang for a few illegal votes. Section 4. Medical horrors and foul play. From rabies to murder. While the political gangs are heavy suspects for sure, medical experts and historians have rapidly fired off a crazy array of alternative theories. Because from the moment Poe was brought into Washington College Hospital, his symptoms were bizarre and incredibly violent. We've got theories ranging from carbon monoxide poisoning from 19th century coal gas, to mercury poisoning from old cholera treatments, to even a targeted beating by the angry brothers of his wealthy fiancé. At the time, a lot of people just blamed his known struggles with alcohol. Temperance advocates totally weaponized his death as a cautionary tale of drinking yourself into the grave. But modern doctors, they aren't so sure.
In 1996, a cardiologist named Dr. R. Michael Benitez reviewed Poe's symptoms blindly and diagnosed encephalitic rabies. Poe had alternating lucidity, intense visual hallucinations, a wildly fluctuating pulse, and he even refused alcohol in the hospital, which perfectly mimics the hydrophobia you see in late-stage rabies.
But wait, there's one more eerie medical clue, and it didn't show up until 26 years later, when Poe's body was exhumed to be moved to a new monument. A worker noted a hard mass literally rolling around inside Poe's skull. Now, brain tissue rots away very fast after you die, so modern forensic experts suggest this could have actually been a calcified brain tumor. A massive tumor would absolutely explain the sudden bouts of madness, the erratic behavior, and those intense hallucinations right at the end of his life. Section 5. The Final Cry for Reynolds. The haunting conclusion in the hospital tower. So let's slow things down a bit and enter that locked hospital tower where Poe spent his final isolated days. He was put in a room usually kept for severe drunks, locked away from everyone, even his own family, because he was deemed too excitable. His attending physician, Dr. John J. Moran, claimed Poe delivered these incredibly flowery, tortured speeches between his fits of madness. Now, Moran is a totally unreliable narrator who spent decades embellishing this story for paid lectures, so take his exact quotes with a grain of salt. But underneath the spin, Moran paints a very real picture of a man gripped by sheer, unadulterated terror in a dark room. And that brings us to the most chilling detail of all. On his final night, long after the delirium had taken full hold, Poe began repeatedly crying out into the darkness. He was shouting for an unidentified man named Reynolds. Through the dark, early hours of Sunday morning, he just kept screaming this name until his voice completely gave out. So, who is Reynolds? Was he hallucinating about Jeremiah Reynolds, the famous Antarctic explorer who actually inspired his only novel? Or, much more sinister, was he pointing the finger at Henry R. Reynolds, the actual election judge presiding at Gunners Hall where he was found? Was he shouting the name of his political captor? Or, maybe his fever-addled brain was just misremembering his own uncle's name, Henry Herring. To this day, the true identity of this phantom Reynolds remains a total mystery. Around 5 a.m. on Sunday, October 7th, the delirium finally broke. The frantic energy that had consumed his body for 4 days just faded away. Poe reportedly delivered these final words, "Lord, help my poor soul," before quietly succumbing to the mystery. The creator of the detective story passed away, leaving his own tragic story unfinished. So, what do you think really happened? Was it the violent political cooping gangs of Baltimore who stole his clothes and his life? Was it a calcified brain tumor or a sudden fatal case of rabies? We might never have the definitive smoking gun proof, but exploring this incredible evidence brings us so much closer to the dark, gothic reality of his final days. Is it just perfectly fitting that the master of the macabre left us with a puzzle that no detective will ever truly solve? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those questions, and as always, keep looking for the clues.